Well, good morning, everybody. You know, I always like to thank our band for all the great music that they provide, but I want to single somebody out this morning especially, Rachel Mayberry, who sang on King of Kings. Number one, she has an awesome voice. Number two, as she is preparing to welcome like 170 kids, because she's also our children's ministry director, she's up here singing on Sunday, and so she can do it all. Thank you so much, Rachel, and we're looking forward to a great week at VBS with you at the helm. So I want to begin this morning's message with a question, and I'll be honest with you right up front. This is kind of an uncomfortable question, but it's an important question because it's something that is kind of a universal human experience. Here's the question. Have you ever been tempted because of something in life, some challenge, some hurt, to just give up? Anybody ever been tempted to give up? I think we've all been there, mostly when we're dieting, right? Because you try really hard, right? You figure, I'm going to lose the weight, I'm going to get in shape, and I'm going to eat less, and I'm going to work out more. But here's the problem. No matter how much you work out and no matter how few calories you consume, your waistline seems to stay about the same. And so eventually, you just kind of throw in the towel, and you just kind of give up. Now, sometimes the temptation to give up is a little bit more significant. Sometimes you got a big dream. When you're young and dumb and right out of college, you have a dream to make a dent and a difference in the world. You're going to get that job that is going to change the world, but then you keep on trying to get that job, and that job never opens, and so you don't get your dream job. You just get a job that pays the bills, and eventually that dream inside of you kind of dies, and you just give up. Have you ever been tempted in life to give up? Keep that question in the back of your mind because we'll come back to it a little bit later in this message. So this weekend, as PK mentioned at the beginning of the service, we are kicking off a brand new series here at Zion. This is going to be a summer-long series where together we are going to be walking through and working through the second book of the Bible, the book of Exodus. Now, part of the reason I'm excited about this series is that even if you're not like a regular church-going person, even if you don't read the Bible a lot, my guess is you know some of the stories in the book of Exodus. Because in the book of Exodus, we get a Nile River that turns into blood, and we get a Red Sea that parts into two. We get a pillar of fire that hangs in the sky, and we get some bread that falls down from on high. We get a rock that shoots out some water, and of course, we get those 10 commandments chiseled in stone that come from God the Father. Part of the reason the book of Exodus is so good is because the stories are fun and fantastic, and they are action-packed. In fact, this is the kind of book that if you needed a star to turn it into a movie, Chuck Norris would be a great leading man, right? Because the book almost reads like an action movie. But as we get going on this series, here's what you need to know, and this is very important. If all you do is read the book of Exodus for its action, and there's a lot of action in it, you're actually missing the main points of the book of Exodus. Because the main point of the book of Exodus is not just that it's full of fun stories with lots of action. The main point of the book of Exodus is that these stories are supposed to gain some traction in our lives. Because at the end of the day, this ancient book in the Bible is meant to be applied. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's meant to be applied in some challenging, very challenging ways. And we're going to see right out of the gate just how deeply this is true in a story that we're going to talk about today from Exodus chapter 2. Now, before we get into today's story, I need to set just a little bit of context here for you. The book of Exodus itself opens at a very dark time in the history of the nation of Israel. Because as the book of Exodus opens, the people of Israel, the Israelites, are in slavery to the biggest, baddest empire at this time, which is the empire of Egypt. And their slavery to the Egyptians comes with all the things that you think slavery comes with. It comes with all sorts of beatings and bruises. It comes with all sorts of hard and backbreaking work. In fact, in Exodus chapter 1, Israel's slavery is summarized like this. This is from Exodus 1, verse 14. The Egyptians made the lives of the Israelites bitter. with harsh labor in brick and mortar. And so the Israelites are doing all the capital projects for the Egyptians. They're building all those pyramids. Not only that, they're doing all kinds of work in the fields. And so they're also doing the agricultural work for the Egyptians. And all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked the Israelites ruthlessly. Now, I want you to pick up on that word ruthlessly. Let's do a little bit of technical work here for you. The Old Testament written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word behind this word ruthlessly is the word parek, which means to grate away. So think of like a cheese grater. That's what's happening to the Israelites' bodies as they are undergoing all sorts of back-breaking work. Their bodies are being grated away. At the end of the day, when they come home, their hands are so bloodied and bruised that it really does look like they've run them over a cheese grater. They are literally working themselves to death and working their fingers to the bone. And yet, there's an interesting hitch in all of this hard work, because their work life stinks. But their home lives, it turns out, are actually pretty good. Because as it turns out, Exodus 1 verse 12, the more the Israelites were oppressed, the more they kept getting married, and the more they multiplied. They had kids, lots of kids, big families, and they kept on spreading. It turns out that at the end of the day, the Israelites came home and they had a family life that was fabulous. Now, this actually posed a concern to the king of Egypt at this time, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and here's the concern it posed. Pharaoh needed slave labor to keep the Egyptian economy going, but he didn't want too much slave labor. And here's the reason why. Pharaoh knew that there was power in numbers. And Pharaoh knew that if the Israelites grew too much, if they had families that were too big, they could actually band together and they could maybe actually stage a coup that would overthrow him as the ruler of Egypt. And so Pharaoh began to get a little bit nervous about that. And so here's what he did. He decided to engage in a little bit of population control when it came to the Israelites. He gave an edict in Exodus 1 verse 22. He said to all of the people of Egypt, every Hebrew boy, every Israelite boy that is born from here on out, you're going to have to take him and you're going to have to kill him. You're going to have to throw him into the Nile River, the main river in Egypt. Because here's what Pharaoh didn't want. He didn't want all of these Hebrew baby boys growing up to become men and then somehow getting together and raising an army that could overthrow him. Now, it's this background that actually takes us to our story for today from Exodus chapter 2, because at the very beginning of the chapter, we meet this Israelite couple. We have a man, his name is Amram, and we have a woman, her name is Jochebed. And the two of them decide to get married one day. Exodus 2 verse 1, now a man from the tribe of Levi, some of you may know this, the nation of Israel or the people of Israel were divided into 12 tribes. And a lot of times a member of one tribe would marry another member of the same tribe. And so a man from the tribe of Levi, that's Amram, married a woman from the tribe of Levi, that's Jochebed. And you know how the story goes. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the what? Baby carriage. And so sure enough, they get together, she becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to and already we got a problem, a son. The kind of kid that the Pharaoh of Egypt in this day and age would say, you have to kill. But come on, you know a mother's heart. She looks at her child and she sees that he's a fine child. Because when they're babies, they're all fine children. They're cute. It's when they grow up that problems develop, right? But when they're babies, they're amazing. And so she sees that he's a fine child. And she can't bring herself to do it. She can't bring herself to obey Pharaoh's edict. And so here's what she does. She tries to hide him for 3 months. Now, who in here has had a baby in their household before? Anybody? Okay. Can you imagine how hard it would be to hide an infant for 3 months? I mean, think about this for just a second. All it takes is just a little case of colic for them to demonstrate to you the ear-piercing, decibel-maximizing power of their little lungs, right? And this would pose a big problem for Jochebed because we got slave masters all over the place. We have Egyptian army officials all over the place, and all it would take is for one of them to hear a cry of a little baby boy, for them to come in, check it out, rip the baby out of her arms, and throw it into the Nile River. And so for 3 years, Jochebed is living in this deep and grating fear. Until finally, after these 3 months, she can't take it anymore. She can't do this anymore. She can't hide her son anymore. And so Exodus 2 verse 3, she gets a papyrus basket for her baby. And what she does is she coats it with asphalt and pitch. Here's the reason she does that. She wants to make it kind of watertight. And then she does the unthinkable. She takes her child, she takes her baby, and she puts her baby in the basket. And then she takes the basket and she sets it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Here's what Jochebed's doing. She's given in because she can't hide her kid any longer. And so she sets her child in a basket along the side of the Nile River. And no, she doesn't obey Pharaoh's edict to the law, but she basically obeys it, right? Because even though she doesn't actively kill her baby, she basically leaves him for dead. All it would take is for that little basket to break free from those reeds, start floating down the Nile. Eventually, you're going to come to a fast, rapid part of the Nile. The basket will tip over. Baby's gone. All it would take is for that baby to be out there in the hot Egyptian sun for more than a few hours, day on the outside with no food or water. Baby dies. All she's doing is delaying the inevitable. When Jochebed puts her baby in a basket and puts the basket in the Nile, here's what she's doing. Because the stress of hiding her baby was too much, she's giving up. Let me ask you a question. You ever been tempted to give up? You know, it turns out that day, as Jochebed puts her baby in a basket and walks away, there is somebody who decides to stay behind. Because this baby actually has an older sister. Exodus 2 verse 4, his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, we actually know the name of the sister. Her name is Miriam. And we don't know exactly how old she was at this time. Most scholars think that it's probably about 7 years old. And so if you can imagine what Miriam must have been going through as a 7-year-old little girl. I mean, she's literally watched her mother take her baby brother and leave him for dead on the bank of the Nile River. How much therapy do you think she needed after watching that when she grew up? I mean, this is an awful sight to see. And as she's watching from a distance, things begin to get really bad. I mean, things rapidly deteriorate because, wouldn't you believe it, Exodus 2 verse 5, who should show up right there at that exact spot by the bank of the Nile but Pharaoh's daughter? You know, the daughter of the guy who issued the edict to kill all the Israelite baby boys. Well, she just happens to be wandering down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants are walking along the riverbank. And what should she see but a basket among the reeds with a baby? Now, she didn't know the baby's in there, but the basket piques her curiosity, and so she sends one of her female slaves to get it, and she opens it, and she sees the baby. And of course, the baby, who's just left there, is crying. And then, catch this line, Pharaoh's daughter feels sorry for the baby. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she says. Now, this is a remarkable scene, and here's why. Verse 6 says that Pharaoh's daughter feels sorry for this Hebrew baby. Question for you. Can you see a feeling? I mean, you may be able to see like an indication of a feeling, right? If somebody's happy, they may smile. If somebody's sad, they may cry. But can you see a feeling in and of itself? No, you can't. You know why? Because feelings aren't physical. They're emotional. Which is why, if you really want to, you can hide your feelings. You can be super sad, but still put on a happy face. You can be really mad, but you can still act like you're cool and calm and collected. Here's the reason that's so important. Here's Pharaoh's daughter feeling sorry for this baby boy. Here is this baby's sister watching from a distance. Now, the baby's sister can hear what Pharaoh's daughter is saying. She can hear her say, hey, this is one of the Hebrew babies, but she can't see what Pharaoh's daughter is feeling. So for all Miriam knows, Pharaoh's daughter could be going, hey, this is one of the Hebrew babies, better dump him in the river. Better obey my daddy's edict. And so it's at this point that Miriam, as a 7-year-old girl, has an excruciatingly difficult decision to make. Because she can either run away because she's scared to death because here's the daughter of the most powerful man in the world who's just found her brother. Or she can try to save her brother. As a 7-year-old girl, it is remarkable. She doesn't run away. She goes up to the daughter of Pharaoh. And she says, hey, that's a cute baby. Gucci, Gucci, goo. So, I heard you say that it's one of the Hebrew baby boys. You know, I know quite a few Hebrews. Exodus 2, verse 7. Would you like me to go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse that baby for you? Can you imagine how nervous Miriam must have been as she asked that question? Because she doesn't know what Pharaoh's daughter's going to say. She could get mad and say, no, my daddy says I got to kill him. And she could see her baby brother die right before her eyes. Can you imagine what a sigh of relief Miriam must have breathed when Pharaoh's daughter says, yeah, go and get someone to nurse him for me. And so the 7-year-old girl, she goes and she gets who else but the baby's mother, who also just happens to be her mother too. And Pharaoh's daughter says to Jochebed, hey, I want you to take this baby and nurse him for me, and I'm going to pay you. In other words, Pharaoh's daughter feels so bad for this baby boy that she doesn't just want to rescue him from imminent danger. She wants to take him and raise him as her own. And so she's hiring out Jochebed to basically be like a nanny or a nursemaid to take care of the baby. And so Jochebed takes the baby, nurses him as the child grows older, doesn't need to be nursed anymore, and so she takes him back to Pharaoh's daughter. And this little Hebrew baby boy actually becomes Pharaoh's daughter's son, which would make him Pharaoh's grandson. It's kind of ironic. A kid that Pharaoh wanted to kill becomes part of Pharaoh's family. And by the way, Pharaoh's daughter names this child what? Moses. You guys know the story of Moses? You know, the guy who, yeah, we do know the story of Moses here. The guy who actually did manage to stage a coup and pull off the very thing that Pharaoh didn't want anybody to do, to free his slave labor force. and to lead the Israelites into their freedom? That's the same Moses. But here's the amazing thing about the beginning of Moses' story. Moses was only able to do that because of a woman named Jochebed who, in a moment of heartache and heartbreak and despair, made a really difficult decision to give up. Got a question for you. Have you ever been tempted to give up? You know, what if giving up isn't always a bad thing? In fact, let me take it one step farther. What if giving up sometimes is actually a necessary thing? So way back in 1935, there were a couple of guys, Bill Wilson and Bob Smith, and the two of them were struggling with an addiction problem. They were actually addicted to alcohol. And so the two of them got together, and they started talking to each other to kind of hold each other accountable as they tried to break their addiction. And they founded an organization that you've probably heard of before. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. Anybody ever heard of that? And at the foundation of AA are AA's 12 steps. And part of the reason AA's 12 steps are so fascinating to me are because of steps 1 through 3. Because the first 3 steps of AA's 12 steps, here's what they are. They're basically an invitation to give up. Step 1 of AA's 12 steps. We admitted that we have become powerless. In AA, it's powerless over alcohol, but you can become powerless over a lot of different things. We admitted that we had become powerless, and because we weren't able to control everything, our lives had become absolutely unmanageable. Now that leads us to step 2. Because we came to believe that even though we couldn't control everything, AA will put it like this: there is a power that is greater than ourselves. Now, in Christianity, we don't just believe in a power that is greater than ourselves. We believe in one God who has all power. And because he has all power, he can help us. He can manage what we cannot manage for ourselves. He can fix what we cannot fix for ourselves. And God can restore us to sanity. And that leads us to step 3. Which is this: in light of that, in light of all of God's power, we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. In other words, here's what we do. We give up. But here's the key. Here's the key in steps 1 through 3 of AA. We don't just give up, we give it up, whatever it is that we're struggling with, to God. So, many decades later, in the early 90s, there was a devotional book that came out that was actually based on these first 3 steps of AA. And the title of the book is actually just a summary of those first 3 steps. I can't. That's step 1. God can. That's step 2. I think I'll let him. That's step 3. Now, it's here where the rubber kind of hits the road for you and for me. Because those 3 things, I can't, God can, I think I'll let him. Those 3 things are things that all of us need to learn how to say. Because all of us need to learn how to give up something. Where do you need to say those words? What do you need to give up? Maybe for you, you're struggling in your marriage, and boy, you've tried to make everything work, right? You've gone to the counselors, and you've begged, and you've pleaded, and you've prodded, and maybe you've even cajoled and tried to manipulate your spouse, but the more you try to manipulate them, the angrier they become at you. Maybe this is what you ought to try to do. You ought to go to God and say, God, I can't. I've tried everything and nothing's worked. But I believe you can. I think I'll let you. And turn your marriage over to him. Maybe you're here this morning and it's a sickness. You got that devastating diagnosis and it just rocked your world. It turned everything upside down. And whenever you get that diagnosis, what does everybody always say? Which, by the way, this is a great thing to say. I'm not criticizing this at all. But everybody always says, I'm going to fight it. And so you do. You go to the doctors and you get the treatments and you have the surgery and you visit the oncologist. And yet, no matter how much you fight, you can't quite seem to make yourself better. And the doctors, they can't quite seem to come up with the right cocktail of stuff to make you better. Maybe this is the moment where you kind of know what you need to do. You need to say to God, God, I can't. In fact, I don't think a doctor can either, but I believe that you can. So I think I'll let you. And you turn your sickness over to God. Pretty famous verse from 1 Peter 5, verse 7. Cast all your cares, all the stuff that you care about that you can't seem to figure out and that doesn't work out. Take all of that stuff and give it to God. Why? Because he actually knows how to take care of you. You see, sometimes it's good to give up. In fact, one of the things that I love about this verse, 1 Peter 5, verse 7, is that this is not just an invitation from God. This is something that God himself actually does. Here's how he does it. Kind of like Jochebed had a son, God has a son too. And kind of like Jochebed made an excruciating decision because she knew what she needed to do. She took her baby and she put her baby into a basket. God made an excruciating decision too. When he took his son and he put his son into a basket. For me and for you. It turned out pretty well, don't you think? In fact, I was thinking about this. When Jochebed put her baby in a basket, her son in a basket, that action led to the salvation of the nation of Israel when Moses rescued them. When God took his son and made his decision to put his son in a basket, that action led to the salvation of the world. When Jesus rescued us. You know, over the course of my life, I've been privileged to know a couple of modern day Jochebeds. A couple of women who actually hit a point in their life where they said, you know what, I just can't do this. It's too much. I brought a couple of pictures here. Here's the first one. This is a picture of a lady that I got to know named Shay. You see right there, she's holding a baby. And at the time, she was struggling with some substance abuse problems. And she knew right there that was a baby that she could not raise. And so there were lots of tears and lots of anguish. We talked, we prayed, and she finally came to a point where she said, I can't. But she was a believer. So she believed that God could. So here's what she did. She put her baby up for adoption. Most difficult decision she's ever made. Here's another woman I got to know, kind of a similar situation. Her name was Wendy. And Wendy actually already had a son. And he was growing up, getting older, and there came a point in her life where she knew that one was already stretching her thin, two was going to break her. And so we talked and we prayed, and she came to that moment where she just had to say, I can't. But she also believed in God, and she believed that God could. And so she was going to let him. And Wendy, just like Shay, decided one day that she was going to put her baby up for adoption. Now, I've gotten to know a lot of women over the years who've been in similar situations. I've gotten to know these women really well, and here's the reason why. Those kids that they're holding right there actually turned out to be these kids that my wife and I are raising right now. You see, my life was forever changed, and Melody's was too. Because of some people, some women, who were brave enough to say, I can't. But I believe in a God who can. And so I think I'll let him. That's the power of giving up. One more thing before we wrap up today. Maybe you're here and you're saying to yourself, I can't. And not just, I can't handle this, or I can't do that, or I can't fix this thing over here, but I can't give something up. It's just too scary. I just want to end with a bit of encouragement. And I want to try to fractionally reduce your fear. It's always scary to give up. It's always scary to give up. So I'm just going to try to fractionally reduce that fear. And it actually goes back to what Jochebed did with her little precious baby boy. I mean, can you imagine doing that kind of a thing? Back to Exodus 2, verse 3, she gets a papyrus basket for him. She takes and puts it in it. Now, just a little bit more technical work here for you. The Hebrew word for basket is the word tavah. Now, hold that word in your head for just a second. Tavah. Here's the reason this word is so important. This word actually pops up long before this story. Not in the book of Exodus, but in the book of Genesis. Here's the backstory. There's a guy named Noah. Remember Noah? Noah was the guy who God came to one day and he said, listen, I know you're in the middle of a drought, and I know the ground is dry, and I know there are cracks everywhere, but guess what? All of that is fixing to change, because the jet stream is fixing to dip, and El Nino is fixing to come. Ever heard of monsoon season? Well, it's going to be a lot worse than that. There's going to be so much rain that it's going to flood worse than Houston, God says to Noah. That's a very loose paraphrase of that story, okay? But God says to Noah, if if you want to survive, you got to do something. Here's what you got to do. Genesis 6, verse 14. You got to make yourself an ark. Hebrew word for ark is tavah. Here's the encouragement I want to leave you with. When you got to give something up, when you got to pull a Jochebed and put what is most precious to you in something that looks as weak and as rickety as a basket, when God's involved, something that looks as weak and as rickety as a basket is actually as strong and as sturdy as an ark. So come on. What is it for you? God's got this. And He has you. I can't. God can. I think I'll let Him. That is Jochebed's story. It's also an invitation to you and to me. And when you take that step, you just never know how things are going to turn out. And you just never know what God is going to do. And if you don't believe me, just go back and read Exodus 2.